Hello everyone, what's up? Welcome to the first ever edition of StatHow. So today I have a couple of graphs, charts, or whatever you want to say on global CO2 emissions and on climate change in general. So the first graph I have is on the per capita CO2 emissions worldwide. And not surprisingly, number one on this list is the United States, followed by Canada, South Korea, Russia, Japan, Germany, China, the United Kingdom, Italy, France, Brazil, and India. So, United States, not surprising that they are number one. I think you all could have guessed that, or most of you probably just assumed it. But surprisingly, Canada, number two on this list. Although it shouldn't be that surprising as when you think about it, the daily lives of Americans and Canadians really are not that much different in terms of their resource use. Number three, South Korea. Not surprising when I think about it, but I would never have guessed. If I had to take a guess, I would have never said that South Korea would be number three in per capita CO2 emissions. But being a developed country, it is not very surprising that they are that high. Um, Other ones on this list are almost all developed countries. Pretty obvious that developed countries have a higher per capita output of CO2. The only non-developed countries or developing countries you might want to say would be China, Brazil, or India. Although obviously all three of those countries have had huge economic growth in the last couple of decades, which is what is putting them on this list. And China and India, them being high on this list and still having a lot of room to grow, especially India. If they go up to even China's per capita output or even higher, that's really not good for global CO2 emissions with China and India having such a high population. If they also have a high per capita output, that will really help to increase global CO2 emissions, which is really bad as the world wants to be going down in CO2 emissions, not going up. Next up is not the per capita, but the increase in CO2 emissions from 1990 to 2017. So these are the countries that have had the highest CO2 emission growth in the last 30 or so years. And I would not look at the middle numbers of 10.35, 9.21. Those are the raw numbers. On the right is the percent increase in CO2 emissions. And so if you go at the percent, China at 278% increase in the last 30 years is by far and away number one on this list. Again, I do not think that is surprising to anyone as China has had huge economic growth in that time span, and economic growth is going to be one of the biggest factors for increasing CO2 emissions. Another interesting point that can be seen here is that the other countries, all of the other countries on the list, are either Middle Eastern, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or East Asian countries, South Korea, Taiwan, China, Malaysia. So it's kind of interesting that all of the countries with the biggest increase are Middle Eastern or East Asian. Although most of these countries have had decent economic growth in this time span, so it's not too surprising to see some of them on this list. For the last chart is a survey on how people feel about climate change. Do they think it is a major threat that is in that horrible looking dark green color, a minor threat or not a threat at all. One thing to point out is that just because a country is not on this list doesn't mean that they fall too low to be on it. Of course, many countries were just not surveyed. It would be impossible to survey every single country in the world. So, top of countries surveyed, Greece. 90% of people in Greece think climate change is a major threat, and 96% overall think climate change is either a major or minor threat. Also, good to point out is that there are many countries from all over the world. Greece, from Europe, in Asia, you have South Korea, Mexico in North America, Argentina and Brazil in South America, and even Kenya in Africa. So it is nice to see that from a global threat, you see a global response in people actually caring about this issue. And of all these countries, only three, the bottom three, Russia, Nigeria, and Israel, have a minority of respondents claiming that climate change is a major threat. Although, thankfully, all three of those countries have a majority thinking that it is a major or minor threat. So even of the worst responding countries, very few still say it is not a threat at all. Although, of course, we all know that just because people claim it is a major threat does not mean that at an individual level that people will be changing their lifestyles, or that at a nationwide level that nations will actually do things to reduce their CO2 emissions, like actually keep to the accords of the Paris Climate Agreement, or take it one step further and reduce their own emissions even more than what they agreed to in the Paris Climate Accords. Well, unless you're the United States and you pulled out of the accords, in which case, I guess they can do whatever they want. So, if you liked this episode, I will hopefully be doing many more episodes on all kinds of different topics. If you like this video, please give it a like. Definitely comment in the comments or send me a private message. Anything you would like to see, any way I could improve on my future videos. Obviously, I will continue to improve the quality of videos as I get used to making and editing videos, making more complicated videos. But I don't want to have too complicated videos. I would like to make shorter, simpler, but more videos, maybe 4 or 5 a week, I think would be ideal, as there's just so much good quality data and content out there that I can comment on and show to you guys. So thanks if you're watching this. I'm actually really surprised if anyone is watching this. So thanks, and see you next time.